Hello guys, it's Jonathan here doing another Bakugan discussion, this time another BakuTech discussion, specifically on the weirdest gimmicks in BakuTech. And I will say, there are a lot of weird Bakugan in BakuTech, so I probably could have put 20 or so Bakugan in this video, but I felt like that'd be way too long. Maybe I'll do some kind of other gimmicks video at some point in the future, with a different idea to talk a bit more about some of the others, but for today, we're just talking about the ones that I think are the weirdest for one reason or another. And I have 8 of them in particular here, so I guess we'll just go ahead and get started. First up we have Diocivic. This was the star of my last Bakugan video actually, but yeah, this thing, opening up you just see the gimmick in action. There you go. Unfortunately, it didn't get the boost here, but had this landed upright on that magnet you saw underneath, then it would have, but anyway. So Diocivic's whole thing is that you get Savic, which is a small extra metal piece that just sort of flies out when it opens up, which is already sort of interesting with this piece here, but it's nothing that crazy either. I mean, we've had Dice Throwing Bakugan in the past, it's sort of like that, so at first glance this doesn't seem that weird, but the actual functions of Savic are what make it weird. Now, I've talked about this a few times now, and again, I've talked about this literally in my last Bakugan video, but Savic can boost any Bakugan. It has to land on its magnet on a card for it to work, but basically, if it lands on a card and you have one of your Bakugan on that card, or maybe it lands on an open card and you stand a Bakugan of your own on there later, then Savic can boost one of your Bakugan. It's just not limited to Diocivic, which is weird, because all Bakugan like this usually are using a G-Power dice for themselves, not necessarily a boost. But the fact that it also can boost your allies makes this a really, really strange Bakugan, as I can't really think of any other Bakugan that can just natively boost their allies from the Bakugan itself. So this thing is just really, really strange. Next is one that's going to seem very random at first, but I do have a reason for it, and that is Killer Volca. Now, Killer Volca at first glance is probably one of the strangest choices for a video like this. The gimmick here isn't actually all that crazy, but it always just made me scratch my head to why they made it the way they did, which is why it's here, because it is a very weird gimmick in the sense that it could have had some potential, but it exists and doesn't do a whole lot. So the idea here is that when you hit one of these two fin pieces here, the tail will drop down onto the ground like that, so it does give you some extra plastic touching the ground. Having a hit-based gimmick like that is actually pretty interesting, but again, they don't do much with it. You only get a little bit of plastic touching the ground, and this doesn't have a crosspiece on it, so you can't swap it out for one of Gallo's crosspieces to get rubber. There's no extra weight being shifted downwards. So there was potential to make this a really interesting gimmick, and maybe could have made the video that way anyway, but the fact that they just didn't think to do that when they usually do take a lot into account for designing these Bakugan is just really, really strange. What's even weirder is that they made Killer Volca Kai much later in BakuTech, and they opted to make these manual parts down here metal, but they left the tail alone entirely, so they had a chance to fix this mistake. Even if you're not adding a crosspiece, you can add metal, again adding a weight shift, but they just opted to not. It's a somewhat interesting gimmick as is, but the fact that they not only missed the opportunity to make it really interesting once, but twice? Yeah, this ended up just being a really weird Bakugan overall. Next is Hager Daguma. This thing is a fun one, as it is another sort of hit-based Bakugan, which, again, there aren't like a ton of these, but the ones we do have are kind of interesting, and this is another one of them, and it's also meant to be defensive. Basically, when you hit this sort of large button here that really juts out and also makes it kind of hard to roll, it will grab a Bakugan, which, again, very strange idea. Its effectiveness is somewhat decent. I mean, it's not great, but it can stop a Bakugan as long as it's not strong enough to just straight up knock it off a card, which can be a bit of a problem. And also assuming that it actually stops it to where the magnet doesn't touch the ground, so it does have a lot going against it, but it does kind of work sometimes, so it's an interesting idea. I mean, having a defensive Bakugan that just grabs its opponent to stop it, that's certainly a gimmick. It's always one I found very interesting, so I figured I would include it in the video. Next is Windmill. This one has these metal blades that can just kind of pop out when it's closed, which is already pretty interesting. But yeah, Windmill's just really, really strange overall. The idea of Windmill is you have these soul pieces here, which are of course metal, but Then you also have these metal blades, so it is fairly bottom heavy, which is noteworthy for curve shot Bakugan. And yes, this is sort of a curve shot Bakugan, but it's not a normal curve shot Bakugan. That would be much, much too simple for it to get onto this type of video. As I mentioned, the blades can pop out while this thing is closed, and it uses the blades as you curve shot it. This thing actually ends up being a really, really strong curve shot attacker because of this, although it does require its own sort of special curve shot. So the gimmick on this thing, it's not inherently crazy structurally, but how it's used is really weird. Again, it requires its own rolling style, and it actually does work, and it's just weird. Again, definitely worth mentioning on this video. Windmill's just a Bakugan that I could talk about for a long time with how strange this thing is, but it's probably not as interesting to sit here and talk about it, so anyway, I'll go ahead and just move on from it. Next is Nino de Shao. So Nino de Shao is a two-sided Bakugan. So the thing about these Bakugan with two magnets is that they're always interesting, but we've seen it before. We've seen it in regular Gen 1 Bakugan. This isn't new to BakuTech. We also had Twin Dober earlier in BakuTech, which had a sort of attack-oriented regular G Bakugan and also a defensive low G setup for its other side, which is a pretty standard adaptation that you'd kind of expect in BakuTech, but with Nino de Shao, not only does it have an interesting idea, inherently being, again, a two-magnet Bakugan, these are always interesting, but rather than having two separate modes on this thing that have different uses, they just straight up made a good and a bad mode. This is a gambling Bakugan, effectively, which is a very interesting idea. So first up we have this mode, which is really bad. It does absolutely nothing. It has zero use in any sort. It just sits here like this. It's way too small to have any occupancy. Its shape isn't really good for defense. Doesn't have anything spraying out, nor does it have any real weight behind it, so its attack is worthless. It doesn't have any kind of additional techniques, high Gs or anything. So yeah, the side is just straight up bad. And that is to balance out its other mode, because its other mode is absolutely ridiculous. So just dropping this thing on the card, it does that. That didn't even have momentum from rolling. I just dropped it and it did that, which is just absolutely ridiculous. This thing has insane levels of power. I mean, you could also argue it has certain, occupancy here. I mean, its occupancy isn't good, but it is still large, so you could argue that there is a little bit of occupancy there. Also, it tends to have a pretty strong magnet, so as a defensive Bakugan, well, it's not a defensive Bakugan, but its defense capability isn't horrible. It's just that the pop-up force on this thing is absolutely ridiculous. Again, it moved the entire card in the direction it opened because of how much force this thing has when it pops open. That is ridiculous. If this was the only side of this Bakugan, this would be the best attacker in the game, no questions asked. But instead, they decided to balance it with a bad mode. So again, having two magnets is already fairly interesting, but balancing it in this way is just very, very strange, and I guess you could say it works fine enough. And now we have Bury Beyond. So Bury Beyond is really straightforward. You have different stats in BakuTech, one of which being defense. How do you defend a card? Just give a Bakugan a giant rubber band. There you go. One of the biggest struggles of defense Bakugan in BakuTech is size, as occupancy usually is highly valuable in being defensive. Without at least decent occupancy, defense is worthless as you aren't doing a good job defending the card. Bury Beyond just kind of throws it out the window because instead of having a larger figure, you instead just get a giant blockade to go in front of it. I mean, that works. Yes, you can curve shot around it, or also, aim for these sides to kind of get it to flip around, so it is something you can beat, but it is still really, really good, concept nicely for double stands, which can also somewhat counter curve shots since it got you roll at the same time, and you might get there first, meaning they may not have space to land, but also it does require a hit to sort of turn it, meaning that they have to waste a turn doing that, so you can still set it for something else like that, so it does become a difficult Bakugan to actually manage, making it really good for defense. So yes, this weird, strange looking gimmick does actually work. I mean, you assume it would anyway, but it just looks so weird, a giant sort of rubber band on a Bakugan. This one just works and is weird just visually. I think most people who see Bury Beyond for the first time take note of it with how striking it is. I know I did back in 2015, so yeah, this is definitely an interesting one. And let's go ahead and go back to back on these weird gimmicks with Oz Press, which also has a rubber band here. However, Ozpress isn't the same as Very Beyond. It is a large Bakugan, has good occupancy, unlike Very Beyond. However, its pure defense isn't quite as good as Very Beyond's because it has a much larger rubber band. This one doesn't. It's thinner, also much lower. So Bakugan can kind of just trip over this and get into this part of the card here, which can give them space to open, but it is still pretty effective at defense, so I wouldn't be too worried about that. That said, it also has another pretty interesting idea behind it, because the rubber band here isn't actually meant purely for defense, it's actually meant for attack. Yeah, so when this thing actually opens up, it sort of pushes forward. The idea is to open up, and if there's Bakugan here, it can push them. Also has kind of an upwards arc to it as well, which is meant to kind of lift them up and just kind of throw them, which again does its work, kind of. It does struggle against lower Bakugan, also bulkier Bakugan, so against a lot of actually good Bakugan, I don't think Ozpress works that well. It can still work, it's still a solid attacker against them, but it's not great either, it's just fine. But against any weaker Bakugan, yeah, this thing is a massive problem. Or even just a decent attacker that doesn't have a ton of weight behind it. Like Jigen Runner or Kachigal, for example, I think this thing actually can have a pretty fair shot at just escorting them off of the card. So it can be used similarly to Very Beyond. Again, you have the rubber band there, which is striking, looks weird, but also the concept behind it using a rubber band to just push a Bakugan off of a card, again, that's just weird. It's a really weird gimmick, but even if it does struggle against some of the best Bakugan in the game, it does actually still kinda work, so that's cool. And last, but certainly not least, we of course have Made Last Boss. Made Last Boss is a fun one, because this thing just has this dial on its back, which looks weird as is, but it has 8 different modes, because you can just sort of twist this thing in any direction that you want. Having it towards the bottom can actually make it a pretty solid curve shot attacker, especially with these extra metal pieces down here, so that's cool. Or you can put it up here to give it kind of extra, power for straight shots. You could turn it to the left or the right for, just different weird setups in how this thing is going to roll, as it will always lean to one side. Or you could lessen the impact by sort of, putting it up here or up here, so that can work. Or even in these downward angles, which can have sort of a similar effect, but also you can do curve shots with those downward angles, and it will sort of just have its own weird, unique function, which its effectiveness can be questionable in that state, but it's at least worth noting. But yeah, Made Last Boss just allows you to sort of control everything you're doing, how you're rolling. It's very interesting. It actually reminds me a lot of the convert system from BakuTech, except built into one Bakugan. The convert system allows you to sort of offset the weight of a Bakugan, which can be for curve shotting, to put metal on the bottom. You can just load it up with metal to, make it a good straight shot attacker. There's something you could do, but you can also offset it for, different rolling patterns. So it almost feels like they tied the convert system into one of these later Bakugan without using the convert system. It's a very weird idea, but I do like it. But anyways, that's all for this video. I just wanted a chance to talk about some of these weird gimmicks and why they're weird. There's definitely some other Bakugan you could have put in this video, of course, but these are the 8 that I want to talk about. Again, I could always talk about more in a future video, maybe framed a little bit differently, but still, there's always room to talk about more Bakugan stuff, especially from BakuTech, so yeah, that's all for this video though. So anyways, thanks for watching, and bye-bye.